Hi, today I'll be coding an animation like this one, and it's also going to be an entry for the current CodePen challenge, which is lightness, that is the L in HSL. So HSL is hue, saturation, lightness. The hue goes around the cylinder from 0 to 360 degrees. The saturation goes from the middle axis, where it's 0% and you can see everything is gray, to the surface of the cylinder, where it's 100% and you can see we have the full color. And the lightness goes from the bottom, where we have black at 0%, to the top of the cylinder, where we have white at 100% lightness. Okay, now in our case the saturation is always going to be 0, so we're always going to be on the middle axis of the cylinder. And if the saturation is 0 and the lightness is fixed, then the hue doesn't matter. It can be 5, 173, 211, it doesn't matter. It's always the same color regardless of the hue. So we're just going to zero the hue, and we're always going to have 0 saturation because we're only going to have grays. And the lightness is going to be different because we're going to have different kinds of grays, as you can see right here, from completely white to lighter, darker grays. But let's get to writing something. So first we're going to set the total number of possible values. Let's say that's going to be 20. And we are going to set randomly the currently selected one. So that's going to be n times this random function, which gives us a random number between 0 and 1, and we're going to want to have an integer here. So round it, but round it down because we don't want to risk rounding up to n. That is, we only want to have possible values starting from 0, 1 up to n minus 1. So not including n, so we don't want this to be accidentally rounded up to n. Okay, having done this, we're going to put everything within a form, and then we're going to have an inner wrapper, which I'd like to use field set for, but apparently there are still some issues with using display grid and display flex on it, even though in theory I heard those were fixed, but in practice they didn't work properly for me, so we're going to use a div. Sorry about that. We're going to set a role group on it to make it more like a field set. Also aria label, so a picker. Okay, now having done this, we are also going to set in a style attribute two custom properties. So basically we're passing n and k to the CSS as custom properties, and it's going to be the exact same thing with k, right? I don't know why I didn't just type it, because it wasn't much to type anyway. So here we're going to have a loop, and in this loop we're going to have let I going from 0 all the way up to n, increment this I, and create our input elements, which are going to be radio buttons. So type radio. They're going to have a name, same name because they're part of the same radio group. Okay, and also an ID, and this one is going to depend on the loop index. So we're going to need to interpolate that, and the value of this ID is also going to be the value of the for label, of the for attribute of the label. Sorry, for attribute of the label. Okay, and let's also set the value there. And one more thing here, in the style attribute, we are going to pass that index to the CSS as a custom property. And having done this, there's just one more thing left to do here, and that is set a checked radio button. And the checked one is going to be the one for which I equals k. So now you can see how, let's look at the compiled HTML. You can see k is 15, and if I scroll down, we are going to see that for the 15th input with I 15, we have this checked attribute. Great. Now let's move on to the CSS and let's start prettifying stuff. If you've seen my previous videos, then you know I like to do this. On the body, div, label, set display grid, okay, and on our radio buttons, and not just on them, also on the labels following them, we are going to set grid area. They're all going to be on the first row, and for the columns we are going to use that index I. But the thing with that index is that it's 0 based, and the column indices for our grid have to be 1 based, so we need to add 1 there, and now it looks better. So now just for the radio buttons themselves, we want them to be on top, so just ensure that, and we don't want to see them because they look ugly. Okay, now for the labels themselves, we are going to set some dimensions, but first on the form we are just going to bump up the font to make everything more obvious, make it thicker as well. So it's going to look something like that. Okay, much better. Now we're going to decide upon a unit, and let's say that this is going to be 2 ems, and here we're going to set the width to that, we're going to set the height to that as well, and let's also set box shadow just so that we can see the boundaries, something like this. Let's also make it inset so it's more obvious. Here we're going to set a width, and this is going to be twice the unit, and we're going to set a background as well, and this is going to be an HSL value, and as I said, we're going to just zero the hue. The saturation is 0 because we have a gray, and let's say it's going to be 20%, something like that. Okay, now we are going to want to set lighter colors for those, but first let's place content center so the numbers are in the middle, right? And now for the color, we are going to want to set, it's going to be an HSL value, 0 hue, 0 saturation, and the lightness, let's just set 50% there, but we're going to want this to depend on whether our option is selected or not. So 100% minus, so if it's not selected, then we're going to multiply that flag. So not selected is a flag that's either 0 for the currently selected option or 1 for all the others that are not selected. So let's get this not selected flag. So basically this is going to be the minimum between 1 and the difference between the current index and the index of the currently selected item. So the index of this label and the index of the label corresponding to the currently selected input. So let's get that difference first. This is a calc I minus k. So I is the index of this label, the current label, and k is the index of the currently selected label. And then we are going to have our not selected flag, and this is going to be the minimum between 1 and the absolute value of this difference. Now the absolute value of this difference is the maximum between its additive inverse, which is -1 times the difference, and the difference itself. And of course punctuation is important, so here we're going to multiply with not selected. Let's make it a bit more obvious, slightly darker. Okay, now here we are going to also set some styles for our wrapper. So if I could type, that would be great. So we're going to set a transform, translate. So we're going to have calc k times minus u, right? But the thing is, minus u, sorry. we are going to want this in the middle, not on the left. So we're going to need to subtract 0.5 from here. Okay, we could also just bring the minus from there, take the minus from there, and just bring it here. So have minus, we're going to have 0.5 minus k. So that gives us the same result. Okay, so having done that, we're going to want to bring in some interaction with JS. So add event listener, change, and let's see what we do here. So first up, we're going to get to the target. So this is going to be the event target, and now we are going to get its parent. So parent node, this is the group wrapper, right? And in its style attribute, I'm going to set property k to the index of the newly currently selected item. So style get property value, that's going to be I, and of course we are going to want a number, not a string there. So now you can see how if we click those, you can see how they actually change, which is nice. Okay, so having done this, let's also set a transform here, and this one is going to be scale, right? And we're going to have calc 1 minus, in the not selected case, times 0.5. So you can see how it looks like that, but we want this on this edge. So it's going to be, we want its transform origin to be along this edge, and along this edge means at 0% horizontally, and for the ones before, we want the transform origin to be along the end edge horizontally. So for those before, we want the transform origin to be at 100% horizontally, and for those after, we want the transform origin to be at 0% horizontally. So we are going to get a sign of that difference, and that is going to be clamp -1, the difference, and 1, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to link to an article explaining things like how to get the sign and other functions that are not yet implemented in CSS, how we can get them with the functions that we already have, and I'm going to link to another article explaining how we can use a single custom property like this not selected flag to control multiple properties. So yeah, I'll be linking to all of that, and the finished result here and the inspiration and all that stuff, it's going to be all in the description. So check out the description for further info. Now, having done this, we are going to set that transform origin, as I said, and we are going to have calc 50% times 1 minus the sign. So now you can see how they look nicely in place, because 1 minus -1 gives us 1 plus 1, so that's 2 times 50% gives us 100%. 1 minus 1 gives us 0 times 50%, that's 0%. So having done this, right, one thing I don't like, you can see how if I click there, nothing happens. I have to click there. So let's make the height twice that unit. And having done that, we are going to need to first set here a height, or we can set it here. Right, and here we can set align self center. Okay, that didn't work for some, it didn't work, because it takes the height of its children, so we need to set the height actually here, right? And here it has to be align content. Okay, so that's much better. And here we're also going to set overflow hidden. We are going to set a border radius, and it's going to be smaller than half, so smaller than 0.5 times the unit. Now this looks much better. And let's make some refining changes. You can see how here it just shrinks when you click. Let's do that as well. So I don't know, 0.85. And here we're going to have transition, transform, something like that, right? And then we are going to have here transition, inherit, and the exact same thing we are going to have right here. And now you can see how it shrinks and it moves smoothly. Let's get rid of that ugly box shadow. Let's have a nice little hand there, cursor, pointer, right? Okay, but one thing I don't like, we still get the hand there, and yeah, that ugly selection. Let's fix that. User select none, and we don't want the whole thing to shrink when you click there, and we don't want the hand. So what we're going to do is here we're going to set pointer events none, and here at the very end, if not checked, right, we're going to for the label actually, we are going to set pointer events, right? So it's going to look like that. Okay, now again more for box shadow, right? No horizontal offset, a blur, and an HSL 0, 0, and then let's say 5%. You can see. Let's make it something like that. So you can see how it changes. Oh, and one nice thing about this, we don't need to click, we can use a keyboard, right? I like how it just goes. Right, okay. So having done this, let's put stuff in the middle. So we are going to set place self center, right? And you can see how it only looks like it's in the middle horizontally, and that's because at this point the body still takes the height of its content. So we are going to set min height to the full viewport height. This gives us an ugly scroll bar, and that's because of the margin on the body. So if you zero the margin there, then we get rid of the scroll bar. And let's also set a light background. So again, it's going to be an HSL value, 0 hue, 0 saturation, and the lightness is going to be something very light, different from what we've had before. Okay, so it's going to be something like this, and I'm not going to be playing with it anymore, just like that. Okay, I'll stop. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, if you like the work that I'm putting out since early 2012 and you want me to be able to do more in the future, please consider supporting it. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon. Or if monthly support is not your style, there's the option of a one-time donation. Or you can make this cat happy with a gift of her Amazon wishlist. Or you could at least share this to show the role that can be done in CSS these days. And a teeny tiny bit of JS. Because honestly, I think it's pretty damn cool. In any event, thanks for watching. All the resources are going to be linked in the description, and I'll see you next time. Bye.